Mr. Lochocki. How should we understand the extreme opposition taking on the streets against the TTIP, which, after all, some claim at least some benefits for the European economies?
Yes, at first it had to be noted that even though there were 100 to 200,000 people showing up on the streets, protests could be far more severe. So in fact, the resistance against TTIP in Germany is far, far smaller than, say, as we currently witness in France. However, the protesters have a point. They basically make clear that they are concerned with that representative democracy will be undermined, that there are certain treaties that will be signed that will prevent the German government to interfere with trade deals. They're right on that, and they are concerned with the mere issue that closer ties with the US economy will lead to certain Australian and German society, certain jobs will be probably torn down, that will not be as successful as they currently are, though they are afraid of, not as we insinuated on beforehand, on the political fallout, but they're rather concerned with the social and democratic costs such a deal could entail.
Well, Mr. Hufbauer, coming from Washington, how do you understand, first of all, the differences between different capitals in reactions to TTIP, for example, France and Germany, in terms of degree? And secondly, what would this mean for the US politics? After all, for some time, working on trade quite hard.
Yes, well, in Washington, the transatlantic negotiations have very little attention. All the focus is on the Trans-Pacific Partnership in Washington and in the U.S. in the presidential campaign. So that's the first point. The second point on the German reaction especially, it's troubling and it's curious. The reason it's troubling is that Germany initiated the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Secondly, Germany has an export surplus, unlike the United States, which has an export deficit or an import surplus. Germany is actually doing quite well in Europe. So here you have a country which is doing well, and thanks to international trade in large part, yet you have these large opposition groups, and I think it shows a broader antagonism now to capitalism, to corporate firms, so forth.
How much is this, Mr. Lochocki, therefore I want to go back to you, related to the anti-globalization and anti-trade trend that we see in politics these days? How much will this mean for the elections upcoming in many European capitals? Will election go and all of these complaints and anti-globalization rhetoric's gone?
You have a very fair point here. It's very important to emphasize that the people opposing TTIP are not necessarily against free trade. They consider TTIP as a globalizing force which is in a sense unprecedented, that they can't really understand what's happening, and they have lost trust that their elites will take care of it in a manner that would suit the purposes of the common population. Though somehow you can compare the situation to international migration flows. People are kind of wondering whether whatever is decided in Berlin or Paris, Brussels or Washington really lies in the interest of the German voters in this respect. However, as I emphasized beforehand, the protests in Germany are very, very limited in comparison to other European countries, for one important reason, that the German established parties, the SPD, the center-left, and the CDU, center-right, are more or less backing the treaty, meaning that German parties have no interest whatsoever in making a big deal out of this in the upcoming federal elections next autumn. Meaning that in France, in spring 2017, TTIP, or international trade, might as well be an issue in electoral campaigns. However, in Germany, this issue will not be used for political mobilization.
Mr. Zhang, you've been listening to your colleagues from different parts of the world. Of course, this is mainly what is going on between the two sides across the Atlantic. But that also reminds us about the Pacific. There's also the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Do you think there are underlying similar logics between these two in terms of its challenges to further go ahead?
Yes. I think that both TPP and TTIP, on behalf of economic integration between developed world, because even if TPP has made some of developing economy involved in, but the rules and regulations has been made and dominated by developed economies. Also, this type of new rules and regulations on behalf of the higher level, free trade in the world. But we have to realize that TTIP between EU countries and the United States on some of critical issues, such as transgene, agriculture products, and culture products such as movie and video, this type of products between EU and the US, they will fighting each other because EU have their traditional culture and agricultural products, but the US has another way. So those contradiction will make TTIP becomes difficult a little bit. Meanwhile, right now, I think the time the time point is not so good, for free trade agreements. Especially the U.S. side punished, Volkswagen last year, and this year Deutsche Bank, and those very big cases. Meanwhile, in European countries, blacks and some of minorities, they are belonging. They want to protect the environment. They want to enjoy democracy, and even if that part of people belong to small part, but they have right to have their voices.
Well, there are different kinds of voices. For example, some of the TTIP supporters have been suggesting it will create the largest free trade zone in the world, benefiting all sides. That's their argument. Take a look at this. The British government has claimed the deal could add to $13 billion to the UK economy, 104 billion to the US, and also 130 billion to the EU every year. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, of course, also says TTIP could create more jobs inside the EU economies, and the benefits could be more. But the genuine question, Mr. Hufbauer, is that there are bigger benefiters, there are smaller benefiters. And therefore, the argument is, can free trade agreements like this bring everybody the part they desire? Will people willing to become, quote unquote, the smaller benefiters?
These trade agreements over time can make a big difference to the economy. At any one moment in time, it's pretty small, but it goes on for a very long period of time. Now, in terms of the effect within the economy, that depends on the government in that economy. It depends on its social safety net, its tax policies, and everything else. The benefits of trade agreements are very broadly distributed across an economy. How they're distributed really depends on internal laws and regulations and other parts. So this notion that trade agreements only benefit the wealthy or only benefit corporations, that's completely wrong. It's completely wrong in terms of all the analysis we've done. I know it's widely believed, but sometimes beliefs are wrong, and this is one of those cases.
Right. Mr. Hufbauer, while you are making your arguments, the interesting question would be for you, sir, is how many people, even back in your own country, would listen to your argument in a campaign season? And what would this mean, this loss of time while we are playing with politics about trade?
Well, that's a good question. And there have actually been polls done in the United States. The majority of Democrats are in favor of trade agreements. About 50% of Republican voters are in favor of trade agreements. Now, I know both Republican nominee Donald Trump and Democrat nominee Hillary Clinton have talked against. Trump wants to actually rip up existing trade agreements, go backwards, put on high tariff. Clinton simply says she doesn't want to go forward with the TPP. So there's quite a difference between them, but neither one is in favor. But I want to emphasize that the people in the United States are not against trade agreements.
Well, we'll see what the voters would say when they're going to the polls. Mr. Zhang, it is not just the United States, not just in Europe, but also in Asia as well. We've seen politics played on TPP as well. At the very first, it created a lot of disagreements, for example, between China and the United States and some of the other countries. But now people are more willing to explore about these possibilities. When you see a deadlock in Washington about how to push forward, whether it's TTIP or TPP, what is China going to do?
Firstly, I'd like to say that even if TPP is facing with difficulty, but I don't think now TPP will be dead. You know that the U.S. has made so a lot of efforts to create, TPP.
The Obama administration.
Yeah. And also, it's too early to say, the TPP to be dead, because now TPP could be the tool for politicians. But I'm afraid that the U.S. Parliament members actually, given that they can give TPP trade promotion authority, and I'm afraid that in the future, after fighting, and maybe they can make consensus. That's a possibility. For China, I think that now in short term, it would be impossible for China to join TPP negotiation because there is a big gap, institutional big gap between China and the U.S.,
right,
between developing and typical developing economies and developed economies. But now, from Chinese side, we are keeping quite open mind on TPP and objective attitude to TPP. We will not oppose it, TPP. On the other hand, now we are carefully study the new rules and regulations of TPP.
I see.
Also, we are chasing the trend. We hope that from Chinese side, we can promote RCEP, we can promote FTAP, as well as the Belt and Road Initiative.
That's right. That's what I really want to ask. Not only you, Mr. Zhang, but also the other two panelists. You've seen a lot of interesting ideas popping up all the time about how to create connectivity and how to do trade for the future. Some are multilateral, some are regional. Therefore, I want to ask both of you, gentlemen, and Mr. Lochocki, maybe begin with you. When TTIP and TPP, both initiatives advocated strongly by Washington, now coming into political difficulties, do you think other regional and multilateral platforms could prosper, or they would face very similar fate?
Well, I think you probably insinuate on the European Union. And the thing is that for the Europeans, the European Union integration effort is first and foremost a political engagement, which is not so much loaded with economics, at least up until recently. So that means that multilateral trade agreements, which have been struck beforehand, at least in the West, they had a very different flavor to it. And as rightfully the previous statement has been underlying, this is a very difficult time to open up for something which is embracing more international openness, more giving up of national sovereignty, for the mere fact that Europeans, as much as United States citizens, they're currently a little wary that globalization seems to take over a lot of lion's shares or chunks of their daily lives they feel very uncomfortable about. So I do think comparisons with multilateral agreements in the past are not very beneficial at that time. TTIP and TPP are very different issues than multilateral agreements that have been struck in a very, very difficult, different political context in the decades beforehand.
Right. And before we go, also from you, Mr. Hufbauer, what do you think? Other options, will they prosper?
I think that there will be a big effort on getting TPP passed after the presidential election and before the next president takes office. If that succeeds, it's a new day. If President Obama succeeds, and he's putting a lot of effort into this.
Okay.
If it fails, then I don't think we're going to have any major trade agreements for at least 2 years, assuming that President Clinton is elected, and if Clinton is elected president, if Trump is elected president, he doesn't want to have any trade agreements he wants to go back and put on new restrictions.
Wow.
So that would also be a very new and unfortunate day.